Good morning. I'm Matt Hotho, the Director of Worship Technology and co-host of our weekly podcast, The Bible Project 2020. And for today's devotional, I thought I would kind of do your homework for you and read some of the readings that are for this Saturday in our Bible Project journey. So if you've been following along and you listen to this devotional, you can take most of Saturday off. So Saturday's readings are Proverbs 25 and 26. And I thought I would just go through Proverbs 25, point out some things that really were of interest to me. And then that would do it for our time together today. One thing that I like about reading the Bible is that the Bible can often be approached like it's a puzzle to be solved, or a mystery that if you unlocked the code, the Bible would make more sense. Or you could solve the Bible. You could figure out what they meant here, what they meant there, and it would all be cohesive. I don't think that's a helpful way necessarily to read the Bible, because I don't think the Bible lends itself to easy answers like that, nor do I think it lends itself to being unlocked. I don't think there's some secret code that will immediately unlock the Bible for us and have it make sense. And I think a life spent journeying for such a code is one that is frankly going to be frustrating, and is probably going to turn one off from reading the Bible. I think a more helpful way to think about reading the Bible is to think about like a really good meal, or not like a really good meal, but a really good bite of food. So I'm thinking, what comes to my mind when I think about reading Scripture and meals is when we're fully enjoying a meal, we eat it slowly. We take it a bite at a time. We savor each bite. If you've ever had a really good meal, you know what it's like to savor every bite of a meal. And oftentimes when we read Scripture, we read it with an expediency. We expect to just get through it. We want to read it quickly. We want to, get done with the reading that we're supposed to get done with. And the Bible doesn't always lend itself to that kind of reading. It wants you to kind of slow down a little bit. It wants to invoke, especially in this poetry and these proverbs and this wisdom literature, it wants you to think. And it wants you to think and relate it to things that are happening around you. It wants images to pop into your head. It wants memories to pop into your head. It wants to make you think of things. So I thought I would tell you what things popped into my head as I was reading Proverbs 25 today. Because I don't know if it'll relate to you. A lot of these things are going to be based out of my experience growing up in Florida. A lot of the language in here has to do with weather. A lot of the language also has to do with song. Not a lot, but some of it. Song is something that for me is language that I pick up on really quickly. I'm not a good musician by any stretch of the imagination, but I really relate with music. Music sort of is I feel like music helps me connect with things emotionally in a way that I can't always express. So a certain chord progression or a certain lyric will stop me in my tracks. It'll make me cry. It'll make me contemplative, anything like that. So music is something else that kind of jumps out at me in this section. Food, I mentioned food earlier, but any references to food, I kind of immediately just think about food that I like, but also the ways I interact with food, whether I interact with it in ways that are like I'm enjoying the food, or am I just using the food as a tool? So what does my relationship with food look like? And then there's one thing in particular in chapter 25 that stopped me in my tracks, simply from a biblical nerdery sort of standpoint. So I'm going to tell you about that as well. So chapter 25 starts off with a heading that is more Proverbs of Solomon. And the heading actually says, "These are also Proverbs of Solomon, copied by the men of Hezekiah, a king of Judah." Hezekiah was about 300 years after Solomon, but was a very shrewd king, a very shrewd political king. And a lot of these first verses in chapter 25 deal with the courtroom. So kind of shrewdness in a political environment. And then it turns to shrewdness in our relationships with our neighbors. And then it continues kind of talking about just a collection of things. Again, Proverbs doesn't really have an order to it, but it seems like there are some verses here in 13 through 28 that just kind of talk about a good way of being, a good way of behavior, kind of some best practices for life. And a lot of that's in Proverbs, right? Best practices for how to live life. But here are some ones that I just want to kind of point out to you today and for you to reflect on. If you're reading Proverbs 25 this weekend and any come to mind, I'd love to hear what thoughts you have. Or if you've been reading the Proverbs with us up to this point and you have other Proverbs that kind of had language and imagery that stood out to you, that resonated with you, go ahead and comment on the Church Online platform or on Facebook with what those Proverbs were for you and the other people who are watching with you. We can all just learn from each other. What are some Proverbs that are resonating with us today in our time and place, or not even resonating with us in our time and place where we are today, but resonate with us because of what they're talking about. Just like I was saying about music and food and weather, that kind of thing. Okay? So, Proverbs 25, I'm not going to talk about every verse, but I'm going to start with verse 13. So verse 13 says, like the coolness of snow on a harvest day, like the coolness of snow on a harvest day, are reliable messengers to those who send them. They restore the life of their master. So that first line, right? This is a metaphor. This is a like, right? We all learned that in elementary school. Like is a metaphor. So like the coolness of snow on a harvest day. So imagine right? I'm a Florida boy. I remember when I was a kid, my dad would have me go out, not harvest by any means, but he would have me help him with the irrigation. When my grandma was in town, she would make me plant gardens with her. We would be out at the crack of dawn, but we wouldn't stop till 11 or 12, and you sweat. It was hot. It was awful. And maybe we would never experience snow. Again, being in Florida, I didn't experience true snow until I think I was 24. But man, if we were ever out there working and a rainstorm came up, you know what that was like. Like that was, you kept working, but it was much more enjoyable work if it was a light rainstorm. Not a torrential downpour, but a light rainstorm. So maybe if we're in Florida, like the coolness of a summer storm during sprinkler repair, are reliable messengers to those who send them. So that feeling that we have of relief from the heat, that feeling of relief, of comfort, are reliable messengers to those who send them, are messengers to the people who sent them, when they relay the message correctly. Interesting. They restore the life of their master. Isn't it true that a good rainstorm, getting caught in a good rainstorm, not a torrential downpour, but a good rainstorm, can restore some life? I know. I'm no Ralph Waldo Emerson here. Ralph Waldo Emerson here. And I don't pretend to be. I'm just someone who grew up in Florida who feels rain. I was... So this is Thursday afternoon, and I was saying goodbye to Nikki Taylor. She was in the office for one last time today, and I was saying goodbye to Nikki Taylor. And we were standing in the parking lot, 6 feet apart, masks on, and everything. And we're kind of like, just you know how people like say goodbye after you've worked together for like 6 years, and you're just kind of thanking each other for the good work, wishing each other, best of luck in life. And obviously, we're going to see each other again because of the Methodist conference and all that kind of stuff. So it wasn't, it wasn't sappy or anything like that. But, it was heartfelt. But if you're from Florida and it's a summer afternoon, you could feel it in the air, you could see it in the clouds, and you could smell it. And I was like, we got to get going. It's going to rain. And sure enough, boop, raindrops started falling from the sky. And it was like, all right, well, time to wrap it up. See you later. We know, we know when that's coming. You just have that relationship with the weather. And you know what it feels like, and you can draw emotions and connections from that. And that's what's happening here. That's what's happening. And it actually happens all throughout the Bible. But again, it's earthy. It's It's meteorological. It's related to what we experience darn near every day. Not just in Florida. If you're elsewhere, you have predictable weather patterns, but certainly in Florida, this is one of those. All right, going on. Verse 14. People who brag about a gift never given are like clouds and wind that produce no rain. All right? Now, there's been some summers when you're looking at your lawn, and your lawn is that crunchy St. Augustine grass where you know it needs some water and there's watering restrictions and you can't water your lawn, and you see a good rainstorm blowing, you're like, come on, and nothing. Nada, zip. It just gets dark and cloudy and windy, and the rain never comes. That, according to Proverbs, is what people who brag about a gift never given are like. Isn't that annoying? Like, isn't someone who gives a gift or who brags about a gift not given, like, has that level of annoyance? And you can relate it, again, to something that we've all experienced, that we all know what it's like, right? It's just interesting when you read this, and it doesn't really hop off the page to you right away, and then you read it and you think about what your feelings are when that half of the metaphor is true for you, and then you apply it onto the other half of the metaphor, and you're like, oh, wow, yeah. When people brag about a gift that they didn't actually give, I wouldn't think to call it like that, but that is what it's like. So it gives you another way to think about things. And then we're going to go down to verse 19 and 20. So again, these aren't necessarily meant to be read together. They're just separate little sayings here, but trusting a treacherous person at a difficult time is like having a bad tooth or a wobbly foot. All right, that's uncomfortable. Yeah, it's unhelpful, slows us down, it's painful. Singing a song to a troubled heart is like taking off a garment on a cold day, or putting vinegar on a wound. I want to go back to that second line, and here I am waxing all meteorologically. Steve Jervey, if you're watching this, I got you. It's like taking off a garment on a cold day. Now, come on. Florida has 2 seasons, maybe 3. You've got summer, and then you get like mini fall, and then winter, and then mini spring, and then summer. We don't get very temperate days here in Florida. So I feel like we all know that feeling of sometime in October or November where you step outside of your house to get in your car and you're like, ooh, it got chilly last night. And you go scrambling to find your hopefully washed sweater or jacket that isn't too wrinkled from last winter, right? Or let's say you're lucky enough to that first cold front of the year. Here's a good one. Think about this one. That first cold front of the year comes through while you're at work. While you're at work. So you've been working all day. It's been a stressful day. You step outside at the end of the day to go home. You step out the doors of the office and you're like, oh, it's nice out now. And maybe you thought, I'm a little cold. So you bundle up a little bit. But then there's those days when you want to experience the cold. Because you know that being cold like makes you feel more alive, right? I mean, we all can relate to that. So you take that garment off and then you're like, oh, this is that feeling, that crispness, that freshness, that feeling alive. Okay, sorry, you guys are just getting a train of thought right now. And I don't know if they're ever going to let me do one of these again, but here's where I'm going. I don't know if any of you read that book, The Giver, by Lois Lowry in elementary school. But remember that conception that these people in this dystopian society, they couldn't feel things anymore. They couldn't feel these deeper, they knew words, but they didn't know what they meant. And they didn't know what they felt like because they had just been desensitized. But there was this one person in the community, the giver, who maintained what cold meant and could tell you what cold meant and could give you memories of cold and hot and fear and sadness and all these things that make you feel alive. This community didn't have them except for this one person, the giver. And there was this kid, and I think his name was Jonas. And he was picked to be the next giver. And throughout the story is the story of the giver giving Jonas these experiences, and Jonas learning what it's like to experience cold for the first time and experience heat. And I remember reading it as a kid and realizing that how crazy that dystopian future was, because we all have those feelings within us. And to imagine having a life where you don't have those. But I think what happens to us so often is we get into our routines and we forget that we actually have those memories deep within us that we can tap into. And I don't just mean that necessarily for reading the Bible. I don't mean it like, oh, it's a tool for better Bible reading. No, what I mean is like, in these days where it can feel so rote, where it can feel so disruptive, where it can feel so odd, if you think hard enough, you can remember the best meal you ever had. You can remember a cold, crisp November morning in Florida, or that time when you stepped out of your house late at night and it was cold and it was clear and Orion was up in the sky, and you could see it, and you maybe decided to take your jacket off and it felt cold, but it was that good cold, and you stood there and you took it in because you knew that it isn't like this all the time. These are some of the images that this passage here is kind of getting us to kind of think about. Remember, the people who wrote this aren't so different from us. They experienced all these things that we experience today. In fact, they were probably even more in tune with it than we are. They didn't have central heating and air and, that kind of thing. In fact, in the arid environment they were in, the temperature swings were drastic between morning and night. And, they would have been experiencing cold way more often than we were, but it's just something that they connected to for understanding the world around them. So singing a song to a troubled heart is like taking off a garment on a cold day. And think about that too, singing a song to a troubled heart. How many times have people sung a song to you? Did it feel like when a garment is taken off on a cold day? Maybe you never thought about it that way, but I'm sure you wanted to stand there. I'm sure it washed over you. I'm sure it stuck with you because you knew that it wasn't fleeting. It wasn't fleeting, but it wasn't ordinary either. It wasn't something you would just expect to have happen the next day and the day after that. There was something different, and you wanted to remember it. Okay, so one more Bible nerdy thing, and I'm probably going too long here. So one more Bible nerdy thing that's in this passage is actually right after this verse here. So it's verse 21 and 22. If your enemy is starving, feed them some bread. And if they are thirsty, give them water to drink. By doing this, you will heap burning coals on their heads, and the Lord will reward you. Now, where have we heard that before? Well, Proverbs kind of said it, but I think in our Christian context, we remember it from when Paul said it in Romans. So check this out in Romans 12:18 through 21. If possible, to the best of your ability, live at peace with all people. Don't try to get revenge for yourself, my dear friends, but leave room for God's wrath. It is written, "Revenge belongs to me. I will pay them back, says the Lord." Now that's a quote from Deuteronomy, but here's where Proverbs comes in. Instead, if your enemy is hungry, feed him. And if he is thirsty, give him a drink. By doing this, you will pile burning coals of fire upon his head. And so Paul takes that proverb that he knew. By the way, Paul probably had much of the Old Testament memorized up in his noggin. He takes that proverb and he sort of re-proverbializes it even smaller. So it's like that. It's like a game of telephone, only you're trying to make it even smaller. It's like Twitter in reverse, right? Where Twitter went from 140 characters to 280. Paul's going in reverse. He's like, no, I got to make this tweet smaller. I got to fit it in there. So he takes that passage of, if an enemy is hungry, feed him. If he is thirsty, give him drink. By doing this, you will pile burning coals of fire upon his head. And Paul summarizes it as this. And I think this is the thought I'm going to leave us with today. Don't be defeated by evil, but defeat evil with good. Don't be defeated by evil, but defeat evil with good.